It's September, or Apple's month, and this year, Cupertino chose September 7 for its Far Out special event, which gave us first look at the anticipated iPhone 14 generation as well as the Apple Watch Series 8 and AirPods Pro 2nd Gen. The iPhone 14 Pro Max is no different. It has the best hardware and feature loadout among all new iPhones, and is much better differentiated from the rest of the lineup. After using the phone for more than a week, one thing is certain to me, at least if you want the very best of Apple in 2022 and most of 2023. You definitely have to go with the iPhone 14 Pro Max. iPhone 14 models. Aside from the iPhone 14 Pro Max, Apple also announced the iPhone 14, iPhone 14 Plus, and iPhone 14 Pro. The differences between the iPhone 14 Pro Max and 14 Pro are mostly size related, but the iPhone 14 and iPhone 14 Plus are reusing most of the hardware that was used on the iPhone 13 series last year. The A15 chipset from the iPhone 13 Pro Max, old school 60 Hz displays, the old 12MP cameras, and mostly unchanged general design. The novelty here is that instead of a mini version of the iPhone 13, Apple went for a supersized Plus One, which is expected to hit the shelves in early October. iPhone 14 Pro Max design and colors. It's been a good few years since the last major iPhone design refresh, so it's only natural to expect a redesign. Lo and behold, Apple bid farewell to the display notch on the Pro models at least and substituted that one for a punch hole, which has been the go-to design choice on Android phones for years. Nevertheless, in a true Apple fashion, the iPhone 14 Pro Max's so-called dynamic island makes rather good use of the display punch hole, instead of trying to hide this one. Apple embraces it. The dynamic island is augmenting that punch hole and utilizing it in a rather creative way. The dynamic island shows custom widgets and other context-specific pieces of information. For example, the area around the pill can show your currently played music track, incoming calls or airdrops, AirPods pairing prompts, charging notifications, and so on. Overall, props to Apple for coming up with useful ways to blend in the eye-shaped punch hole with an iPhone 14 Pro Max disc out with the old and with the new or goodbye notch. The iPhone 14 Pro Max comes with so-called dynamic island, a clever hardware-software amalgam that leaves the impression of a single oval punch hole. The dynamic island is a rather integral part of the iPhone 14 Pro Max experience as it's thoroughly used in the interface. For example, unlocking your phone with Face ID, which is the default and only biometric unlock option, shows a neat new animation. Playing music gets you a waveform, and a miniature album art, navigation prompts, and so much more. In fact, many ongoing notifications and alerts make use of the dynamic island, and its overall utility is exceptional. In terms of display tech, the XDR OLED Pro Motion display on the iPhone 14 Pro Max is mostly similar to last year's iPhone with a few very notable differences. First up, the new phone has a slightly wider refresh rate span, 120 Hz on the iPhone 14 Pro Max versus the measly 120 Hz we had on the iPhone 13 Pro Max. iPhone 14 Pro Max camera. For the first time on an iPhone, Apple is kind of joining the megapixel wars with a rather ambitious 48MP main camera on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. A welcome change of pace after Apple's year-long love story with the iPhone 14 Pro Max uses a 48MP high-res camera, which uses quad-pixel binning in order to still output 12MP image. Fortunately, quad-pixel binning greatly improves low-light image quality at the expense of spatial resolution, which basically means that you're sacrificing the full 48MP of resolution but get much better light sensitivity, which is crucial in less than ideal lighting conditions. With iPhone 14 Pro Max main camera image quality. When it comes to image quality, the iPhone 14 Pro Max is a most solid performer, with plenty of improvement in terms of detail and color reproduction, but also the distinct iPhone camera look that is instantly recognizable. It builds on the legacy of the iPhone Pro series and delivers mostly similar image quality to, say, the iPhone 13 Pro Max when shot in the default camera mode, which outputs quad-bin 12MP images. iPhone 14 Pro Max ultra-wide-angle cameras. The ultra-wide-angle camera of the iPhone 14 Pro Max is just as good as the one on the iPhone 13 Pro Max, with minor improvements that will hardly be discerned by the majority of people. If anything, expect similar camera performance between the old and the new generation. iPhone 14 Pro Max zoom camera sample. When it comes to zoom, the iPhone 14 Pro Max comes with the optical 3x and new 2x software zoom mode. which crops the main camera sensor and achieves a slightly more natural field of view for portraits. Indeed, you can use that one for portraits, and you're actually better off with that mode in favor of the 3x1. iPhone 14 Pro Max connectivity. Lacking a SIM card tray in the US, the iPhone 14 Pro Max requires you to use an eSIM if you want to. This change is only taking place in the US for now, but we can potentially see the eSIM dominance creep into other regions with future. A rather intriguing new feature of the iPhone 14 Pro Max is the emergency SOS via satellite, which lets you send rudimentary text messages to emergency services or send your location via Find My by utilizing satellite connectivity when there's no cell coverage. iPhone 14 Pro Max iOS. The iPhone 14 Pro Max comes with iOS. The latest version of the OS comes with mostly quality of life enhancements, but also brings a rather intriguing lock screen customization that allows you to personalize the looks and functionality of your lock screen. Most of the changes have been introduced with the always-on display functionality in mind. Of course, Dynamic Islands utility is fully adopted within iOS 16. iPhone 14 Pro Max battery. It's hard to ignore the fact that the iPhone 13 Pro Max is one of the longest-lasting phones available right now, setting a new bar for all future large iPhones, but also propping up a new yardstick for the Android flagships to follow. Can the iPhone 14 Pro Max hold a candle to it? With a sizable 4,323 mAh battery on board, the iPhone 14 Pro Max seemingly has all the right bells and whistles to last a long time. With an efficient new display and a newer, faster chipset, it surely beckons for such expectations. iPhone 14 Pro Max audio quality and haptic. With dual stereo speakers on board, the iPhone 14 Pro Max retains a bottom-firing main speaker and a top speaker sidekick. Last year's iPhone 13 brought lots of quality improvements to the iPhone lineup, and I'm happy to report that those have transferred to the iPhone 14 Pro Max. iPhone 14 Pro Max competitor. When it comes to iPhone 14 Pro Max competitors, it's hard to think outside of the box. If you're considering the largest iPhone, you are likely already in the ecosystem, so getting a non-iPhone is hard to justify. Then again, initial data claims that the iPhone 14 Pro Max could be the most sought-after iPhone for Android would-be switchers who wish to get the very best Apple has on display. Overview. It has all the latest bells and whistles, and no other iPhone comes close. It improves some core aspects of the smartphone experience, like the camera, the performance, and display utility, making it a safe, albeit not that exciting buy, especially when considering new phone categories, like foldables. The iPhone 14 Pro is basically the same phone in a smaller package that's easier to handle, but with a smaller battery and display. We are going to end this video right away. If you have any query or information to share, please leave a comment. Thanks for watching.